Have you ever been judged before you even spoke a word? Imagine walking onto a plane after a long week tired, quiet, just wanting to go home and being told you don't belong in the seat you paid for. Not because of your ticket, but because of how you look. What would you do? Would you stay silent, swallow the humiliation, and move? Or would you choose to stand your ground calmly, knowing that dignity sometimes speaks louder than anger? This is not just a story about a man in first class. It's about every person who has ever been overlooked, doubted, or dismissed simply because they didn't fit the picture. If you were in that seat 2A, what would you have done? Would you have walked away? Or would you have changed everything with one quiet act of courage? Stay with us, because what happened next didn't just shock an airline. It changed how the world saw respect, justice, and the true power of calm. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us tell stories that remind the world what dignity really means. Boarding gate 14B at Denver International Airport was brightly lit yellow. The loudspeaker boomed steadily over the sound of suitcases being dragged and shoes clicking on the tile floor. Summit Air Flight 107 to New York is boarding. First-class passengers, please. Malcolm Reed stepped up, holding the e-ticket on his phone. He was wearing a dark gray jacket, clean jeans, and worn-toe leather shoes. He said nothing, only nodded when he met the eyes of the flight attendant at the boarding gate. Lauren Hayes, the flight attendant, smiled politely, a smile practiced over hundreds of flights, but her gaze was tinged with doubt. She looked at the electronic board, then at Malcolm, her voice low enough for the person behind her to hear, "Excuse me, but first class is about to board. Can you wait a moment?" Malcolm tilted his head slightly, his voice soft. "I'm flying first class." He picked up his phone. The screen lit up clearly. Seat 2A, first class. Lauren hesitated for a moment. She looked closely, her brows furrowing slightly as if she couldn't quite believe what she was seeing. Then she smiled awkwardly. "Oh, of course. I just need to confirm the system." Behind him, a white man with slicked back hair and a charcoal suit stood in the priority line. He glanced Malcolm up and down, then smiled faintly. "There seems to be some kind of mistake," he said quietly, but clearly enough for others to hear. His name was Preston Cole, an investment banker whose face had appeared in several financial magazines. Malcolm listened, but didn't respond. He just took a step forward, holding the phone tightly in his hand. Lauren looked at them both, then bent down to the card reader's keypad. She lowered her voice, trying to sound gentle. "We just need to double-check. Please wait a moment." The words to anyone else might have been nothing, but to Malcolm, they were a small, thin, but deep cut. He had heard that "please check" too many times in his life, at restaurant counters, in hotels, in airports, everywhere where first glances determine how you're treated. Outside, snow was falling lightly on the glass. The Denver night was cold and still. Malcolm stood still, staring down at the e-ticket on the screen. His name was there clearly, Malcolm Reed, seat 2A in capital letters, unmistakable. But Lauren hadn't returned the phone. She was typing something. Her lips pursed. Behind her, Preston Cole looked at his watch, sighed, and said coolly enough, "We're going to be late." Lauren looked up, her voice somewhat hurried. Reed, I need to confirm with the manager. The system reported a duplicate. You may have been upgraded to the wrong rank." Malcolm pursed his lips. He felt his heart slow down, as if his body had long since become accustomed to this reaction. He asked softly. "And if I'm right, we'll sort it out," Lauren replied, still polite. And if I'm wrong, you'll be moved to business class, and the airline will reimburse you for some of the cost." Malcolm looked at her. His voice was calm and cold. "I'm not wrong." The space between them seemed to freeze. The surrounding passengers began to pay attention. A few glances, a few murmurs. Lauren smiled awkwardly. "I'm just following the procedure." "Mr. Reed." Malcolm nodded slightly. "And I," he said, "was just doing my duty as a customer." He took a half step back, so as not to block the way, but his eyes were still fixed on the boarding counter screen. Lauren bent down to call the walkie-talkie. Her voice was small, but Malcolm clearly heard a few words. "Need confirmation from gate supervisor. Seat 2A. Conflict. Yes. The black passenger." He closed his eyes briefly. A sigh. Not angry, not surprised. Just the same old feeling of familiar weariness. "Don't react," he whispered. "They expect it." Behind him, Preston Cole smiled lightly, the smile of someone used to being given priority. He spoke in a voice full of fake goodwill. "It's okay. I can wait a little longer. I believe the company will arrange the right person in the right place." The words seemed polite, but they were laced with arrogance. Malcolm didn't reply. He just looked out the window, where a plane was being towed to the runway, its red lights flashing in the darkness. His hands clenched slightly. A vein stood out on his wrists. But his voice, when he spoke, was still soft. "I have time. I can wait." Lauren turned away, avoiding his gaze. She didn't know that the man standing in front of her was more than just a passenger. He was the founder of Nova Flight Systems, the company that operated the entire flight dispatch system for Summit Air, the airline she worked for. But right now, all she saw was a black man in a gray jacket, and in her eyes, he didn't look like someone who would sit in first class. The loudspeaker rang again. "First-class passengers, please proceed to boarding." Lauren took a deep breath and put Malcolm's phone down on the counter. "Mr. Reed, we'll clarify this right away. Please wait here for a moment." Malcolm nodded. His eyes were calm, but something inside him was moving slowly, like the thin layer of ice on a lake beginning to crack at the slightest sound. He stepped aside, standing by the window. The light from the runway reflected off his calm face, reflecting off eyes that were used to being judged before they were heard. Outside, planes were preparing to take off one by one in the perfect order he had helped create. He pursed his lips and whispered to himself, "Let's see where this goes." That sentence, as light as a breath, but was the beginning of a big wave about to roll up. The loudspeaker continued to blare in the waiting room. "Summit Air 107. First-class passengers, please complete check-in." But at gate 14B, the line was held up by a small detail. "Malcolm Reed's e-ticket." Lauren looked down at the scanner, her brows furrowed. The system displayed 2 passengers sharing seat number 2A. She tilted her head slightly, glanced at the man in the expensive suit behind her, Preston Cole, then back at Malcolm. Her voice was softer, but not as natural as before. "Mr. Reed." It could be a technical error, but Mr. Cole here is a Platinum Plus member of the airline, and he usually sits in that seat every week. We're checking it out. Malcolm kept his gaze impassive. "I understand, but my ticket is valid. I paid 3 weeks ago. There can be no mistake." Lauren nodded slightly, but there was still doubt in her eyes. She turned around and called the management, her voice low but clear. "Gordon, can you go to gate 14B? There is a first-class overlap. The colored passenger, another passenger is holding Mr. Cole's seat?" The words "other passengers" made several people nearby turn. They didn't need to hear more to understand what she meant. Preston Cole smiled, his gaze flicking past Malcolm like someone who'd walked into a wrong place. "No big deal," Preston said evenly, emphasizing each word. "I trust the airline to get it right. I've flown Summit for over a decade, and they know how to treat their loyal customers." Lauren nodded quickly as if vindicated. "Yes, sure, just a few minutes." Malcolm listened, but did not respond. He looked out the window. Snow had begun to fall, tiny flakes clinging to the cold glass. In the din of the terminal, he could clearly see the familiar details of being re-inspected for not dressing like first class. He took a deep breath, remembering the first time he flew business class 10 years ago. At that time, he was a young engineer, having just received a scholarship to study aviation fuel technology. The flight attendant had asked him the same question, "Are you sure you're on the right flight at the time?" He had laughed it off. Now, he no longer felt like laughing. The sound of footsteps echoed. Gordon Lively, the boarding gate manager, appeared in a dark blue suit. His face was stern, his gait quick and sure. Lauren stepped forward, whispering a few words. Gordon turned to Malcolm, his smile thin and expressionless. "Sir, I have been informed of a seat overlap. Mr. Cole is a longtime priority customer, so according to regulations, the airline has the right to adjust to ensure the convenience of high-level members." Malcolm asked slowly, "So how does the company handle it? When the person who paid loses the seat?" Gordon replied immediately, as if the answer was written in the procedure manual. "You will be refunded 50% of the difference and upgraded to business class. That's how we keep things fair." The word fair made Malcolm's lips curl slightly. He wasn't angry, but he felt a mixture of bitterness and amusement. "Fair," he repeated. "You're asking me to give up my legally purchased seat to someone with a higher membership. Where does your fairness lie in aviation law?" The atmosphere in the lobby suddenly became tense. A few people stopped to watch. Preston Cole walked slowly forward, speaking in a pleasant voice. "Dude, we all want the flight to leave on time. Just take the refund, change the seat. Don't make things difficult for her or yourself." Lauren breathed a sigh of relief, thinking that would be the end of it. But Malcolm remained still. His voice was low and calm, enough to silence the entire area. "I'm not making things difficult for anyone. I just want to keep what I paid for." Gordon looked at his watch, impatient. "Sir, if you don't cooperate, I'll have to call airport security." Malcolm blinked and took out his phone. His finger hovered over the screen. A short text message appeared. "To Nina Carter, Ready Plan Delta. Wait for my signal." He pressed send. No one knew that the woman named Nina was the vice president of legal affairs at Nova Flight Systems, the company that provided Summit Air with its entire technology platform from fuel systems to flight safety management. Beside the counter, Rachel Alvarez, a freelance journalist, quietly raised her phone. The camera was trained on Malcolm. She didn't know who he was, but she sensed something in the man's eyes, an unusual calm in the midst of a frenzied crowd. Lauren saw the camera, her voice hardening. "Please do not film in this area." Rachel did not hang up. "I have the right to film in public spaces," she replied. A few people around her started to pay attention, their phones flashing. The small incident at Gate 14B was becoming the focus. Malcolm remained silent. He made no gesture, no attempt to stop anyone. He simply stood, hands in his coat pockets, eyes trained on the large screen displaying the flight number. His expression was odd somewhere between tiredness and calm. Gordon turned back to Lauren and said in a low voice, "Get 2 more security guards. We can't let this drag on." Preston crossed his arms and raised his voice. Honestly, I don't understand why the airline would let people like that delay the entire flight." The words "people like that" fell into the cold air, causing a few passengers to frown slightly. An older woman looked at Preston, then at Malcolm, and shook her head. Malcolm didn't respond, just turned around, his eyes looking out at the snow-covered sky outside. Memories of his childhood on Chicago's South Side flooded back to him, where he and his mother were once asked to leave by a store clerk because they didn't look like real customers. His mother had only said one thing that day: "Don't be angry. Being angry won't change anything. Be successful so they'll listen to you." He had done it, but here, at the boarding gate, he was still being doubted, still having to prove that he was worthy. Lauren bowed her head and lowered her voice. "Mr. Reed, I understand you are not satisfied, but we really have no other choice. The customer priority policy has been confirmed by the system." Malcolm turned, looking straight at her. "What policy allows you to judge who is more important than who, just by looking at them?" Lauren opened her mouth but couldn't speak. The tension in the air was palpable. Preston rolled his eyes, tapped on his phone, sent a text message to someone, and muttered, "I'll talk to her manager later." Gordon signaled to the staff, "Please invite Mr. Reed to the business area so we can continue boarding." Malcolm still didn't move. He spoke slowly. "Clearly I'll go when the firm can show me what clause in the contract allows it." The lobby was so quiet you could hear the swipe of a key card at the next gate. Rachel kept recording, her heart pounding. She knew this moment would be important, not just a video, but a testament to something deeper. Lauren stepped back, avoiding Malcolm's gaze. Preston turned away, breathing heavily, trying to look annoyed. Gordon grabbed his walkie-talkie and stepped outside. "Call security to gate 14B immediately. We have a non-compliant passenger." Malcolm didn't look back. He just smiled, a thin smile, neither mocking nor weak. He knew this wasn't over, and he knew that in a few hours, nothing would be the same again. Outside the window, the Summit airplane taxied down the runway, its headlights reflecting off the thin ice like tiny cracks. Malcolm thought without either of them realizing it that those cracks were growing, and once they opened, no one could fix them. He stood still, calm, silent, but inside, a wave was building silent, strong, and irreversible. The glass door behind the boarding counter opened, and Gordon Lively stepped forward. He had the air of a man accustomed to handling incidents not with understanding, but with orders. Salt and pepper hair, a tailored suit, shoes polished to the point of reflecting the light. In his hand was a walkie-talkie that was always on, ready to issue orders at a moment's notice. Lauren breathed a sigh of relief when she saw Gordon. "Thank goodness you're here." There was a seat overlap between Mr. Cole and Mr. Reed. The system confirmed priority for platinum customers. Gordon nodded, his eyes quickly scanning Malcolm and stopping on his simple gray jacket. It took only a few seconds for Malcolm to feel the appraisal in that look, as if Gordon had just placed him in a different category in his mind. "Mr. Reed." Gordon's voice was even and dry. "Yes," Malcolm replied. "We apologize for the inconvenience. There was a slight seating error. Mr. Cole is a frequent flyer, frequently using seat 2A for business trips. We will reassign you to business class immediately. You will receive a 50% refund." Malcolm looked at him straight in the eye. "I don't need a refund. I need to keep the seat I paid for." Gordon blinked. "You will receive an equivalent upgrade. The business seat is still very comfortable. Mr. Reed, we reserve the right to make adjustments as needed." "You're right," Malcolm said slowly. "But that right doesn't include favoring the man in the suit." over the man in the coat. The silence was tense. Lauren stood nearby, looking around, hoping someone would break the silence. Preston Cole stood behind her, arms crossed, a faint smile on his face. "I think he's misunderstanding," Preston said. "It's policy, nothing personal." Gordon cleared his throat. "That's right. The policy applies to all customers. No discrimination." Malcolm kept his eyes calm, his voice low but firm. "Then I am also a customer. And if everyone is equal, why am I the one being asked to leave my chair?" No one answered. A nearby employee swallowed, and Lauren looked down, avoiding his eyes. Gordon turned to the staff and lowered his voice. "Get security. We have to keep to protocol." Malcolm heard every word. He sighed. Not the sigh of a man who was afraid, but the sigh of someone who knew he was about to witness the same thing over again. While Gordon spoke on the radio, Malcolm took out his phone. The screen lit up. A message from Nina Carter, his deputy legal director, had just arrived. "I got the signal. Should I intervene now?" Malcolm typed a reply slowly. Each word sure. "Not yet. Wait for the second signal. They still have a chance to be right." He pocketed his phone and looked up at Lauren, who was still wavering between them. "Lauren," he said softly, "do you ever think that little things like this are where injustice begins?" She didn't answer. Maybe it never occurred to her. Preston Cole chimed in triumphantly. "I don't see any unfairness here. The company is trying to be reasonable. He's just making things complicated." Malcolm looked at him, his gaze so calm it made Preston a little uncomfortable. "You know, Mr. Cole," Malcolm said, "I used to write software to handle priority conflicts in airlines. It never discriminated based on skin color." Preston laughed, thinking he was joking. But Lauren flinched. Something about the remark made her feel a little uneasy, as if she had missed something important. Gordon interrupted. "That's enough, Mr. Reed. I'm asking you to cooperate. Otherwise, I'll have to ask security to escort you out of the boarding area." Malcolm turned slowly toward him. "I won't leave, because I've done nothing wrong. If you want, you can call security, but make sure you understand the consequences of this decision." Gordon frowned. "Are you threatening me?" Malcolm replied. "No. I'm just reminding you that not everyone who is silent is weak." A murmur rose around the gate. People had stopped to watch. In the crowd, Rachel Alvarez kept her camera trained on Malcolm. She saw every detail: his composure, Lauren's avoidance, Preston's haughty look. She knew this was no longer about seats, but a mirror of the way the world worked. A middle-aged woman's voice rang out from behind. "He bought a valid ticket. Why are you forcing him to leave?" A man replied, "Don't interfere. They have their reasons." Gordon heard, turned around, and said in a harsh voice, "Everyone, please keep quiet. This is an internal matter of the company." Malcolm said nothing more. He stood still, silent. Old images flashed through his mind: the first shareholder meeting where he had been mistaken for a waiter, the charity dinner where he had been asked by security, "Are you sure you're invited?" And now, a legitimate ticket being questioned simply because he didn't look like first class. In that moment, he felt a part of him struggle. Part of him wanted to let it go, like 100 times before, to stay quiet, to endure, to avoid trouble. But the other part couldn't take it anymore. It said, "Enough." Lauren saw the change in Malcolm's eyes. It was no longer just calm, but a deep determination, one that made her feel suddenly small. Gordon looked at his watch and ordered firmly, "Okay, call security. This passenger is not following instructions." Malcolm smiled slightly, almost whispering, I guess you just made the most important decision of your career." Gordon paused for a split second at that, but he quickly dismissed it. "I don't have time for distractions." He turned to Lauren. "Get the other passengers on board. We can't afford to delay the flight." Lauren nodded, but her voice was trembling. "Yeah, but if later, if the company reconsiders, there's no if, do it." As she bent down to scan Preston's ticket, Malcolm took a few steps back. The light reflecting off his glasses cast a shadow over his face. He pulled out his phone, looked at Nina's last text. Ready. His fingers flew across the keyboard, then paused. He wanted to give them more time to see the mistake with their own eyes. Behind her, footsteps sounded. 2 security guards were approaching. The crowd murmured, and a few people started taking more videos. Rachel held the camera, her heart racing. Malcolm kept his eyes on the opening boarding door. A white plane with the Summit Air logo was waiting on the tarmac. He knew full well a signal could shut down the airline's entire technology for hours, but he stood still, waiting to see which of them would be the first to realize what they were doing and with whom. The boarding light continued to flash. Flight 17 still read, "Boarding." But in Malcolm Reed's eyes, something had changed, a calm, but with the weight of a storm brewing. Footsteps echoed clearly in the waiting room. 2 security officers approached, neatly dressed and walking cautiously. One was older, with gray hair, named Officer Daniels. The other was younger, with a sturdy build, named Miguel Torres. Both had been called in for a passenger not complying with airline instructions. Gordon Lively stepped forward to greet them. "Here he is. Thank you. That man over there," he pointed at Malcolm, "is refusing to move from first class. We need assistance to clear him up quickly." Officer Daniels nodded and stepped forward. "Hello, sir. I'm Officer Daniels from Airport Security. There seems to be some trouble here. Can you explain?" Malcolm turned back, his voice calm as if he were speaking in a meeting, not in front of 2 security guards. "I have a first-class ticket, seat 2A. The airline said there was an overlap and asked me to go to business class. I just want to keep the seat I paid for." Daniels nodded, his voice low but not commanding. "Can I see your ticket?" Malcolm opened his phone and handed over the e-ticket. Daniels examined it, then checked it against the passenger list in Miguel's hand. They glanced at each other. The list read, "Malcolm Reed, seat 2A, confirmed." Daniels turned back to Gordon and said, "According to the list, this seat belongs to him. There is no mechanical fault." Gordon frowned. "Yes, I know. But the airline reserves the right to reassign seats for customer priority reasons. Mr. Cole is a senior member, and so he gets to take someone else's seat," Rachel Alvarez said, her voice clear. All eyes immediately turned to her. The phone in Rachel's hand was still spinning. "Sorry," she continued, "but this is clearly unfair. He has a ticket. Why are you making him leave?" Lauren was confused and said softly, "Miss, please don't interfere." "This is an internal matter," Rachel replied with a slight smile. "It's an internal matter of the airline, but it affects a passenger, so I think the public has a right to know." Malcolm looked at Rachel, his eyes grateful, but said nothing. He knew any protest would only make things worse. Preston Cole interrupted, his voice annoyed. "We're already late. Hundreds of people are waiting because one person won't follow instructions." Officer Miguel turned back, his voice firm. "Please remain calm. No one is being forced to leave if their ticket is valid." Preston waved his hand. "I am a priority customer. I know the procedure." He is just trying to get attention." Malcolm chuckled. "I've had enough attention in my life." "Thank you." The words were short, but they left a heavy impression. Daniel studied Malcolm's face. No anger, just deep weariness. He recognized that this was not a man looking for trouble, but a man accustomed to being doubted. Lauren tried to regain her professional tone. "Mr. Reed, I understand how you feel, but we are just following the rules. The company has a flexible policy for special customers." Malcolm looked at her, his eyes as still as water. "It's not about policy," he said. "It's about who is considered special." Lauren paused at that. Preston frowned, looking frustrated. Gordon blushed, trying to keep his voice calm. "We don't discriminate. Mr. Reed, this is just a VIP clientele matter." "And I'm not," Malcolm asked again, softly. No one answered. Rachel held her phone higher. A few other passengers began filming. For a few seconds, the usually noisy waiting room felt eerily silent, sapped only by the whir of fans and the echoing of announcements. Gordon turned to the two officers, his voice impatient. "Please help us defuse this situation. We need to board immediately." Daniels took a deep breath. "According to the rules, this passenger has a valid ticket and is not causing any trouble. If you are going to force us to remove him, we need a formal reason." Gordon looked around, his voice faltering. "The reason is, he didn't cooperate with the instructions of the airline staff." "Was that instruction legal?" Daniels asked directly. Gordon didn't answer. Malcolm was silent, just looking out the window. The snowflakes were still falling steadily, the airport lights reflecting off them. For a moment, he heard his mother's voice, deep and warm. "When they say you don't belong somewhere, let your calmness make them wonder why." He nodded slightly, as if conversing with a memory. Then he turned, his voice soft but clear. "You can keep the flight, but I cannot keep silent forever. The world is watching." Rachel lowered the phone, her eyes shining. She knew he wasn't speaking just for her, but for everyone who had ever been left out. Lauren bowed her head, her voice trembling. "Mr. Reed, I'm sorry if I offended you." Malcolm shook his head slightly. "It's not you, Lauren. It's the system that makes you believe that following the process is right." Preston sighed and turned to Gordon. "I don't have time for this. If I don't make it, I'll sue the airline." "Go ahead," Malcolm replied. "But this airline may need more lawyers than you think." The words made Lauren look up. Something in the way he spoke gave her a feeling that the man before her was not ordinary. The boarding lights paused. The loudspeaker blared. "Sorry, ladies and gentlemen. Flight 107 to New York is delayed by 15 minutes due to a technical issue." Rachel glanced at Malcolm, realizing he wasn't surprised. She felt a chill run through her, as if some invisible hand was controlling everything. Gordon looked around, worried. "No way. The system is fine." Malcolm slowly took out his phone, his fingers scrolling quickly. A new message was sent. To Nina Carter. "They just called security. Activate low-level Delta alert. Hold for 5 minutes, then restore." No one knew what had happened, but the screen at the boarding counter flickered, then returned to normal. Gordon breathed a sigh of relief, thinking it was just a minor glitch. Malcolm smiled, not a triumphant smile, but the smile of someone who knew the real game had not yet begun. Rachel stepped closer to him, her voice low. "Do you want me to release this video now?" He shook his head. "Not yet. Everything needs to be seen in its own time." Daniels nodded to Malcolm, his eyes filled with silent respect. "I see no reason to send you away. If anything, they are responsible." Malcolm nodded his thanks. He turned to Lauren and whispered, I'm not mad at you. I just hope that in the future, when you meet someone like me, you'll remember this moment." Lauren bit her lip, unable to say a word. The boarding door remained open, but no one moved. Preston grew impatient, checking his watch. Gordon was flustered, trying to stay calm. Rachel scanned the frame, still clutching her phone. She knew this moment would appear somewhere on the internet, in the newspaper, or in the heart of someone who needed a reason to speak up. Malcolm stood still. Outside, the snow had stopped falling. The airport lights reflected off the glass, casting a solitary but determined silhouette on the man. You don't have to scream. You don't have to argue. Just stand there, a reminder that dignity never needs permission to exist. Time seemed to stand still in the waiting room. No one spoke. The distant sounds of the airport loudspeakers mingled with the rattle of trolley wheels on the floor. An eerie silence fell, as if everyone was waiting to see what the man would do next. Malcolm Reed stood still, his hands in his coat pockets. He looked out the window at the plane bearing the Summit Air logo, its headlights reflecting off the thin layer of snow like a cold streak of light. He was used to feeling doubted, but this was different. There was something about the way they looked at him, the confidence that they had the right to decide where he should live, that made him unable to remain silent. Gordon Lively pulled out his phone and turned away slightly. His voice was low, but Malcolm could still make out a few words. "He refuses to move." "Yes, there is security here. If he doesn't cooperate, I'll ask them to remove him from the flight." The word eliminate made Lauren turn around, her face changing slightly. She whispered, "Mr. Gordon, maybe we shouldn't be so tense. His ticket is valid. The system has confirmed." Gordon interrupted Lauren. "This is a matter of principle. If everyone does as they please, order will collapse. We have a policy." Lauren swallowed. Policy. A word she had once trusted, used to mask her insecurities. But today, looking at Malcolm, she was no longer sure if what she was defending was truly just. Preston Cole spoke up, his voice high and clear, as if to assert his position. "If he doesn't leave, I'm going to contact the general manager of the airline right now. I can't believe they'd let a troublemaker delay the entire flight like this." Malcolm turned back, his eyes calm but deep. "I'm not causing trouble. I'm just standing up for my rights." Preston raised his eyebrows. "You should know your place." "I know," Malcolm replied slowly. "Very well." A middle-aged female passenger standing nearby interjected, "I don't understand why the airline handled it like that. He clearly had a ticket. Why did he have to change seats?" Another man chimed in, "Because the other person has platinum class. Don't you see?" The answer sent the lobby into a murmur. Rachel Alvarez lowered her camera a bit and jotted down a few notes in her notebook. A moment of division, prejudice in every word. Officer Daniels stepped closer to Malcolm, his voice low and respectful. "Mr. Reed, I understand you want to stay in your seat. Legally, you have every right to do so. But if the company insists, I will be forced to take a report. I just want to make sure you are prepared for any possibility." Malcolm nodded. "I was ready from the moment they suspected me." Gordon crossed his arms, looking annoyed. "I won't argue further." He was offered a refund, but he still insisted on keeping his seat. "This is interference with the airline's operations." Rachel looked up, her voice clear, echoing throughout the boarding area obstruction, or just refusing to be treated unfairly. Everyone turned to look at her, although her voice was not loud. In the silence, Each word fell like small pebbles hitting the surface of still water. Malcolm turned his head slightly, his eyes meeting Rachel's. They said nothing, but there was an unspoken understanding between the two strangers, one recording, one enduring, both knowing this was something worth seeing. Lauren sighed, her eyes showing the struggle. She whispered to Gordon, "I think we're doing it wrong. Look at everyone. They can see it." Gordon gritted his teeth and lowered his voice. "I don't care what they see. I'm doing it right." Malcolm heard that. He turned around, his voice so soft it was hard to hear procedure correct. "But wrong person." Preston chuckled. "That sounds nice. But here, it's the process that keeps things running." Malcolm took a step toward him, his eyes unwavering. "No, Mr. Cole, it's the people that keep the world running. Process is just the tool." The whole area was silent, a moment so quiet that you could hear the roar of the plane engines on the runway. Gordon took a deep breath, trying to regain his composure. "I will not argue any further. I have work to do. Mr. Reed, I demand that you leave the boarding area immediately." Malcolm didn't move. He took out his phone and quickly scrolled through a few messages. To Nina Carter, "It's time. Full Delta activation. All communications with Summit will be down for 15 minutes. Hold still until I leave the airport." The message was sent silently. Less than 3 minutes later, the electronic board above the boarding counter blinked continuously. Flight code 107 changed from boarding now to system hold, awaiting clearance. The loudspeaker sounded again. "Please understand, the system is temporarily down. We will update shortly." Gordon spun around, confused. "What the—" "Lauren, check the system now." Lauren typed on the keyboard, but the screen went black, displaying only the red text "Error 502, Flight Core, not responding." She looked at Gordon, her voice trembling. "The flight control system is not responding." Malcolm stood still, his eyes fixed out the window, saying nothing. Only a smile played on his lips, the smile of someone who knew the tide was beginning to rise. Preston raised his phone, his voice confused. "What happened? Can we still take off?" Lauren did not answer. Gordon took out his walkie-talkie and frantically contacted the control center. "Control center. This is Lively at Denver Gate 14B. The check-in system is frozen, unable to confirm boarding." "Is anyone handling it?" A voice answered through the cacophony. "We are experiencing the same error across the entire area. The flight core system has just stopped responding completely." Gordon's face paled. "No way. That's the company's main system." Malcolm heard everything. He didn't speak, just turned to look at Lauren. The look in his eyes made her realize something, that the man they suspected might be the one holding the strings of the entire system. Rachel Alvarez kept filming, her heart pounding. She knew this moment, the real power shift, was what every journalist had been waiting for. Malcolm walked slowly toward the waiting seat, his voice soft. "I will sit here. When your company is ready to treat me like a real customer, I will get on the plane." No one dared to say more. Lauren just stood there, her hand holding the list so tightly that it trembled slightly. Preston looked at Gordon, searching for an explanation, but Gordon had nothing to say. Outside, the snow had stopped falling. The airport was strangely quiet, and in the midst of that silence, a black man sat silently in the waiting area, without power, without anger, but bringing the entire system to a halt with a single decision. No more silence. On the large screen in the middle of the hall, the message, "System hold, awaiting clearance," was still flashing. The other passengers began to stir, their murmurs spreading out like small waves. Malcolm Reed sat in the waiting area, quiet amid the chaos. He leaned back in his seat, his eyes fixed on the window where another Summit airplane had just taxied off the runway. Its light reflected off the glass, creating a long streak of light like an invisible line, the line between power and justice. Lauren Hayes remained standing at the counter, clutching the passenger list. She heard every question, every complaint behind her, but the image of the man remained in her mind, sitting still, not angry, not shouting, but holding everyone's attention. "What? Is this a middle-aged man?" asked. How did the whole system stop? Lauren swallowed, looking at Gordon Lively, hoping he would have an answer. But Gordon was confused, holding the phone and calling repeatedly. "The operator's not responding. The dispatch center is also down. The entire system of the company is paralyzed. Preston Cole lost his patience. I don't believe it. A major airline like this is going to shut down because of one passenger." No one answered. Officer Daniels approached Malcolm. "Mr. Reed, I don't know what's going on, but I have to ask. Are you involved in this?" Malcolm looked up, his eyes unwavering. "No, sir, but I understand their system quite well." Daniels was silent for a few seconds. In that moment, he seemed to understand that the man before him was no ordinary man. Rachel Alvarez kept filming, the camera lens shaking slightly with her breathing. She sensed something beyond a minor conflict, like she was witnessing a major change. Lauren slowly walked closer to Malcolm, her voice low and trembling slightly. "Mr. Reed, I just want to ask, who are you really?" Malcolm looked up, a slight smile flashing. "Someone who has learned that silence is no longer an option." Lauren stood still. The words were like a small knife, cutting into the layer of faith she had carried with her through years of service. On the other side, Gordon was furious. "I don't care who he is. I need the system back up now. Otherwise, this whole flight is canceled." He turned to Malcolm, his voice harsh. "Are you satisfied? Everyone has to wait because of you." Malcolm stood up, his posture still calm. He approached the counter, standing opposite Gordon, no raising his voice, no threats, just looking straight at him. "Have you ever wondered why just one person standing still can bring your whole system to a halt?" Gordon took a half step back. Something in Malcolm's eyes made him feel cold. Malcolm continued, "Because your system is built on the assumption that everyone will be silent. But when one person stops being silent, everything falls apart." Lauren listened, her throat tight. Preston stood behind him, muttering, "Cheap philosophy." Malcolm turned to him, his gaze no longer casual, but with the weight of someone who had seen the real world. "It's not philosophy, Mr. Cole. It's reality. I helped his company build flight navigation software, and I know one wrong button press and the whole network stops." Gordon froze. "What did you just say?" Malcolm replied slowly. "Nova Flight Systems is my company, and Summit Air is our customer." The air broke like cracking glass. Everyone around them froze. Lauren could hardly believe her ears. Rachel took a deep breath, her heart pounding. That was the explosion she had been waiting for, the truth hidden in the prejudice. Preston blushed and stammered. You're the CEO of Nova Flight." Malcolm nodded slightly. "Yes, and this airline is using my technology." Gordon was speechless, his face pale. Everything had changed in a matter of seconds. Lauren stepped back, dropping the passenger list to the floor. She looked at Malcolm, shame rising in her. Malcolm didn't gloat. He looked around, his eyes quiet but not angry. "I don't want anyone to lose their jobs. I don't need to apologize. I just want people to understand dignity isn't something that can be upgraded or demoted. It's a human right." The words brought silence to the area. Preston bowed his head, avoiding everyone's gaze. Gordon turned away, trying to hide his embarrassment. Lauren gasped, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't realize." Malcolm nodded slightly. "You don't need to apologize to me. Apologize to the next person you judge before you ask who they are." The loudspeaker blared at that moment, cutting through the silence. "Summit Air System is being restored. Flight 107 will depart in 20 minutes. Gordon exhaled, trying to calm himself. He was about to turn back to the counter to resume boarding when a voice called out from behind him, "Mr. Lively." It was Officer Daniels. He stepped forward, his voice stern but calm. "I'll have to take a report of this incident. A passenger with a valid ticket was asked to leave his seat in violation of regulations. We'll send a report to airport authorities." Gordon was stunned, unable to speak. Malcolm just bowed his head slightly to thank Daniels, then turned to Lauren. "Thank you for listening. I hope you remember this feeling not for me, but for yourself." Lauren nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. Rachel lowered the camera and stepped closer to Malcolm. "I don't know if you'll let me, but I want to tell this story. Not for you, but for people like you who have never had their place." Malcolm looked at her, his eyes softening. "If you write the truth. No embellishment. The truth is strong enough." Rachel nodded, her grip on the camera tightening. She knew she had just captured a moment that could change the way people view justice, not with a scream, but with the silence of one determined man. The boarding door opened again. Lauren turned to Gordon, her voice hoarse. "He will sit in seat 2A. I will take responsibility." Gordon no longer had the strength to object, just nodded, like someone who had just been swept away by a storm. Malcolm walked slowly toward the door. He didn't look back, but everyone followed him. No one spoke. No one dared to breathe. As he passed, the air seemed to quiet down, not out of fear, but out of respect. Rachel looked on and whispered, "A person who doesn't need power, but makes the whole world stop and listen." Outside, the wind carried a light snowflake, the white flakes blending with the blue light of the runway. Malcolm stepped onto the plane. The light fell on his face, quiet and strong. A reminder that justice does not come from noise. It comes from those who dare to stand firm in silence. The plane door closed with a familiar deep sound. The entire first-class cabin was filled with a rare silence. The passengers who had witnessed the whole thing remained silent, as if trying to comprehend what had just happened. Malcolm Reed sat in seat 2A, a seat he had protected not with a ticket, but with his determination. He unbuttoned his jacket, put his phone aside, and leaned back slightly. The mirror next to him reflected the calm image of the man. His gaze turned to the purple-tinted sky of the winter afternoon. Lauren Hayes walked slowly across the aisle, her eyes no longer holding the rigid look of someone carrying out a mission. Instead, there was a mixture of shame and respect. When she stopped beside Malcolm, her voice was soft enough for only the two of them to hear Mr. Reed. "I am truly sorry, not just for what happened, but for my part in making it happen." Malcolm turned, a gentle smile playing on his lips. "You're not the only one who has ever believed you were doing the right thing. It's important that you recognize when what's right needs to be redefined." Lauren ducked her head. She felt a stinging sensation in her nose. "I used to think fairness meant following the process, but now I understand. There are processes that are designed to protect the interests of some, Malcolm nodded. We all learned that the hard way. He turned back to the window. Outside, the plane began to taxi to the runway. There was a low roar as the engine started. In the opposite row, Preston Cole sat still, his usual arrogance gone. He glanced at Malcolm, then turned away slightly, his gaze lost. His hands tightened around his wineglass. As Lauren walked by, he spoke in a low, hesitant voice. Miss Hayes, if you may, please give my apologies to Mr. Reed. Lauren looked at him, her eyes wide. Preston continued, his voice sincere. I'm used to thinking that money buys respect, but maybe today, I'm the one who has to relearn that. Lauren nodded slightly, then continued walking. In her heart, for the first time in many years of working, she felt the beginning of a change, a feeling both painful and bright. The plane taxied, picking up speed. As it lifted off the ground, the night sky opened up below, the millions of tiny city lights receding into the distance, like fading memories. Rachel Alvarez sat in business class, unable to take her eyes off Malcolm's first-class seat. She opened her laptop and began to write down each line. A black man was questioned for sitting in a seat he had paid for, but when he stood up, not in protest, but in dignity, the system stopped. It was not just justice, but a reminder that silence is sometimes the loudest scream. She stopped typing and looked out the window. The clouds were white and layered, reflecting the moonlight. In Rachel's mind, this story was more than news. It was proof that people could still make each other happy without violence or anger. In the cabin, the lights dimmed. Lauren returned to the first-class cabin and asked Malcolm softly, Would you like something to drink? We just departed. Malcolm smiled. A glass of water would be enough. Thank you. Lauren nodded and turned away, but a strange feeling welled up inside her. She had served thousands of passengers, but she had never felt such a strong sense of calm. Meanwhile, at Summit Air's New York office, Douglas Hamilton, CEO of the airline, was receiving a series of urgent messages. The flight management system had just been suspended for more than 20 minutes, causing 7 flights to be delayed. The technical department reported the source of the error is a server linked to Nova Flight Systems. Hamilton frowned and turned to his assistant. Who is in charge of their contract? Mr. Malcolm Reed. The assistant replied. Hamilton was dumbfounded. The name was familiar. He had signed a contract worth hundreds of millions of dollars with Malcolm 2 years ago. Call him right now. I want to talk to him in person. Hamilton ordered. The assistant fumbled. Mr. Reed is on our flight. Denver, New York. Hamilton paused. His heart clenched. He knew immediately what was happening. Oh my God, tell me this isn't true. Back in the air, Malcolm receives a message from Nina Carter. Summit is in touch. They understand. He finished reading, just nodded slightly, showing no emotion. Lauren brought a glass of water and placed it gently on the table. You seem calmer than I expected, Malcolm replied. When you've had to prove your worth all your life, a flight like this won't make you lose your composure. She looked at him, her voice low. Aren't you afraid that everything you do can be misinterpreted? Malcolm looked straight into her eyes. Yes, but if I were afraid, I would always stay in the seat that someone else chose for me. Lauren was speechless at that moment. She just smiled, then stepped back, her eyes still wet. Preston leaned over and said softly, Mr. Reed. Malcolm turned, waiting. I don't know how to say it. I apologize for the way I acted earlier. I forgot that respect has no color. Malcolm looked at him for a moment and said, Thank you. I don't hold grudges. But I hope the next time you see someone being treated unfairly, you'll be the one to speak up." Preston nodded, his voice low. "I will remember, and I won't forget." The cabin fell silent again. The air seemed clearer, lighter. Outside, moonlight streamed through the wings, bathing the cabin in a soft glow. Rachel continued typing the last lines. Justice doesn't need to shout. Sometimes it just needs someone strong enough to sit still. And when that person is Malcolm Reed, the world has to ask, who is really flying and who is stuck on the ground? The plane flew through the thick clouds. Below, the city lights receded like the Milky Way. In the sky, a man looked out silently, his eyes reflecting the vast sky, where all prejudices seemed incredibly small. The engine roared softly, steady as a human heartbeat in the silence. The cabin lights dimmed, and the passengers were plunged into a dim space. But in seat 2A, Malcolm Reed still had his eyes open. He was staring out the window at the endless sea of white clouds under the moonlight. In that space, the past flashed back like old film. Malcolm recalled his early years as a young engineer, often overlooked in meetings because he was the only person of color in the room. He remembered the times he had to prove twice as much to get half as much recognition. But he never held grudges. He learned to be quiet and let his success speak for itself. And tonight, on this flight, he knew his silence had reached its limit. Lauren stepped forward and asked softly, "Mr. Reed, can I ask you something?" Malcolm turned around, his voice low and gentle. "Go ahead. When things happen, you don't get angry. I don't understand how you stay so calm." Malcolm looked at her, his eyes reflecting the dim light. "Because I've gotten angry, many times. But I've learned that anger makes people think they're out of control. Calmness makes them look at themselves." Lauren nodded slowly. "Maybe that's what makes you different." Malcolm smiled. "I just know when to speak, and when to let the truth speak for itself." In the next compartment, Preston Cole looked over. He didn't interfere, just observed. He had thought power was about noise, about money, about fame, about power. But now, seeing a man sitting still and bringing the system to its knees, he understood what true power was. The plane skimmed through light turbulence. Lights flickered. A few passengers woke. Lauren stepped forward, checking on the situation. Malcolm remained seated, his eyes no longer of one who had been offended, but of one who had survived it. In New York, at Summit Air headquarters, the crisis had officially broken out. Douglas Hamilton was standing in the control room, staring at a large screen where a video was circulating online. The scene of Malcolm being asked to leave his chair. His voice, "You should know your place," and the image of the black man sitting still, calm, had caused the internet to explode. The hashtag, "How's Justice?" in seat 2 was climbing to the top of the national charts. News outlets were reaching out. Angry comments, supportive comments, hundreds of thousands of shares. Douglas felt his heart pounding. "Someone tell me, how true is this?" The assistant replied, "It's absolutely true, sir." The passenger was Malcolm Reed, CEO of Nova Flight Systems. Douglas was stunned. "Oh my God, the company that supplies our entire flight control system." A PR executive chimed in. "The media is demanding an official response. If we don't say something in the next 30 minutes, they'll assume we're discriminating." Douglas clenched his fists, then released them, sighing. "I want to see Mr. Reed as soon as the plane lands. Anytime, anywhere, on the plane." Malcolm received another message from Nina Carter. "The video has gone viral. The news agencies are calling us. Summit Air is in crisis. Douglas Hamilton wants to see you as soon as you land." He put the phone down without answering. Lauren saw the thoughtful look on his face and asked softly, "Are you okay?" Malcolm nodded. "Okay. I was just thinking about how a story can change everything. Not because I'm special, but because I'm not silent anymore." Lauren pursed her lips. "Are you going to forgive them?" Malcolm chuckled. "Forgiveness is easy, but trusting again, that takes time and action." In the back of the cabin, Rachel Alvarez was reviewing the video she had taken. When she saw Malcolm looking up at Gordon, she paused. That face, that look, no anger, no pleading, just a calmness that made you ashamed of yourself. She wrote the first caption for the upcoming article. "A man doesn't need to shout to shake the system. He just needs to stay in his place. Seat 2A. She knew that tomorrow. This article would be more than just news. It would be a mirror for all those who had been silent in the face of injustice. Malcolm closed his eyes. For a brief moment, he could hear his own heartbeat blending with the hum of the engine. He felt no relief, only a strange peace. In the clouds, he felt more clearly than ever. Justice comes not from destruction, but from confronting the truth. As the plane began to descend, Lauren approached and whispered, "We're landing in New York. I just wanted to thank you, not only for staying calm, but for teaching me something today." Malcolm looked at her and nodded. "Thank you for daring to look." The plane touched down. There was a slight screech. The passengers applauded, but not in celebration. It was a silent acknowledgement of the man in seat 2A. Lauren opened the cabin door. Preston walked up to Malcolm and said softly, "If you have the chance, I'd like to buy you a cup of coffee. Not to assuage your guilt, but to learn something more real." Malcolm smiled. "When you're ready to listen, I'll tell you." Rachel stood at the end of the aisle, watching him. She felt as if something larger than a personal story was beginning, as if this flight would require one to look back at oneself. The door opened. The cold, dry New York air rushed in. Malcolm walked down the stairs, his posture straight and composed. At the foot of the stairs, a man in a black suit was waiting, Douglas Hamilton. Their eyes met for a moment. Neither spoke, but in that silence, Douglas knew he was waiting not just for a CEO, but for the verdict of his conscience. The airport VIP room was unusually quiet. The soft light reflected off the dark wooden table, creating a cold and tense atmosphere. Outside the glass door, the New York night was covered in a thin layer of mist, the lights of the airplanes flickering like moving stars. Douglas Hamilton walked through the door, looking tired, but still trying to maintain the demeanor of a leader. Inside, Malcolm Reed was already sitting, his hands clasped on the table, his eyes calm. The moment they saw each other, the atmosphere froze. Douglas spoke first, his voice low but hoarse. "Mr. Reed, first of all, I want to say how sorry I am. What happened on that flight was unacceptable." Malcolm did not respond immediately. He just nodded slightly, as if wanting to hear more. Douglas continued, "I don't know what to say. The video has gone viral. The airline stock has just dropped 12% overnight. I have fired the people involved. But I know that's not enough." Malcolm looked at him, his voice soft but full of weight. "No, Mr. Hamilton, it was never just the fault of a few people." Douglas fell silent. Malcolm's gaze left him feeling naked, as if all the years he had spent building his friendly brand image had been an empty shell. Malcolm continued, slowly, clearly. "When a system allows people to be judged solely by their appearance, The problem is not with the individual. It is with the very structure you are protecting. Douglas sighed, rubbing his forehead. I know you're right, but you also understand how the airline industry works. Everything is based on class, priority, points. We just do what the market demands. Malcolm tilted his head slightly. And who created that market? Mr. Hamilton, who decided that a suit was worth more than a pair of old shoes. Douglas did not answer. He bowed his head, silent. The clock in the room ticked steadily, as if counting the seconds of suffocation. Malcolm stood up, walked slowly to the glass door, and looked out onto the runway. His voice was low but warm. I didn't come here for revenge. I don't want to see anyone else fired, but I want to change the thing that made it possible. Douglas looked up. What do you want? Malcolm turned back, his eyes calm but deep as the darkness outside. I want Summit Air to be truly responsible, not with a public apology, but with action. A program of reform and awareness in service culture. I want to see a clear commitment, not a press release. Douglas slowly stood up. What exactly do you want us to do? Malcolm took out his phone and projected a prepared document onto the screen. A training fund called Sky of Equality. We will work together to develop a training program on diversity awareness, anti-bias, and building a respectful environment. Not just for airline employees, but also for partners and senior management. Douglas looked at him intently. You want Nova Flight involved? I want Nova Flight oversight, Malcolm said firmly. Without independent oversight, all promises are meaningless. Douglas was silent for a long time. He looked at Malcolm May, then said slowly, You know, Reed, I've been in this business for 25 years. I used to think fairness was a luxury. But when I saw you sitting there, calm while the world around you was in chaos, I realized fairness has never been a luxury. It's just forgotten. Malcolm was silent. In that moment, he saw in the man's eyes not just regret, but true awakening. Douglas held out his hand. I agree. Summit Air will cooperate with Nova Flight. I promise. This is not just about cleaning up reputation. I will personally take charge. Malcolm looked at the hand. A second passed. Then he took it, squeezing it. If you mean it, this is just the beginning. Don't let it end with words. Outside, snow began to fall. White flakes gently fell on the glass, melting silently. A moment later, Douglas spoke up, his voice low. Mr. Reed, there is something. I still want to ask. Why did you let things go this far? You could have called me at the beginning. Just one phone call. Malcolm smiled lightly, not a cruel smile, just the calmness of someone who had suffered more than that. If I call you, maybe you will believe, but millions of others do not. I do not do it for myself. I do it to let them know silence is no longer the only way to survive. Douglas nodded, his eyes welling up. You just made me understand the responsibilities of power. Malcolm simply replied, Power is not about being able to do whatever you want. It is about being able to choose what is right when it is not easy. When they left the room, the hallway was deserted. In the far corner, Rachel Alvarez stood still, camera in hand. She wasn't recording, just watching the two men walk side by side under the pale yellow light. In her head echoed the words, Not every confrontation is born to destroy. There are encounters that make people understand that. In the midst of darkness, there is still the light of awakening. A moment later, Douglas left. Malcolm remained standing near the window, looking down at the parking lot where the plane was resting. He pulled out his phone and texted Nina Carter, Agreement reached? The first steps are good, but keep a close watch. I don't want it to be all show, Nina replied. Understood. I will set up an independent monitoring team and make it public. Malcolm closed the phone and took a deep breath. There was no pride in him, only peace. He knew the real battle had only just begun, not with the airline, but with human consciousness. Outside, the snow was falling harder. The streetlights were shining white. Malcolm left the airport in silence. The car slowly rolled, taking him into the New York night traffic, where light and darkness coexisted, like two sides of the same truth. The sky in New York was dim and misty with the dampness of early winter. The sun was just peeking over the skyscrapers, casting a pale yellow glow over the hurried crowd. The city was bustling as usual, but on the 42nd floor of the Nova Flight Systems building, the air was unusually quiet. Malcolm Reed sat by the window, sipping black coffee. The light fell on his face, drawing out both exhaustion and serenity. It had been a long night, but it had also been the first night in years where he felt light. The door opened. Nina Carter walked in, a thick file in her hand and a tablet. Mr. Reed, the media is going crazy. Your story is at the top of every major news site. CNN, Reuters, The Atlantic, even the BBC are talking about it. Malcolm chuckled, setting down his cup. I guess they don't miss a beat. Nina nodded. It's not just them. People are spreading the hashtag #Justice, in seat 2A. There are millions of comments of support. But there are also people who think you're just overreacting to get attention. Malcolm replied calmly, We can't control how people think, but we can make them wonder. Nina turned on her computer and projected it onto the big screen in the room. A series of news feeds, videos, and comments appeared. A quick interview with Lauren Hayes was being shared widely. Her voice echoed in the video, soft but sincere. I was the one who saw it all. I thought I was just following the rules. But looking back, I was wrong. I didn't see the person in front of me. I only saw the color and the position. I apologize, not just to Mr. Reed, but to everyone who was overlooked. Malcolm watched the clip, silent. His eyes lit up with emotion. She dared to tell the truth, he said softly. That was the real beginning. Nina switched to another video, Douglas Hamilton holding a press conference. Behind him was the Summit Air logo. In front were dozens of reporters. Douglas spoke slowly, enunciating each word. We take full responsibility for what happened to Mr. Malcolm Reed. We were wrong, not only to him, but to the thousands of customers who have suffered similar prejudice. Today, we announce our partnership with Nova Flight Systems to build the Sky of Equality project towards a fairer, more humane aviation industry. The conference room fell silent. Nina turned to Malcolm, her eyes filled with pride. You changed the industry, Malcolm replied softly, his voice low but humble. No one changes because of a name. They change because they recognize themselves in it. Nina nodded, then pulled up another news item, a brief interview with Rachel Alvarez on local television. She was talking about a story she had filmed. I didn't shoot for attention. I shot because I knew, if no one saw it, it would be forgotten. I saw a man brought low, but he didn't bow. And it was that calmness that made me believe there is still hope in the world. Malcolm smiled slightly. Tell her thanks, he said to Nina. She kept this story alive. Nina made a note in her notebook. I'll do it right away. Oh, and one more thing. Someone wants to see you. Who is it? Preston Cole. Malcolm looked up, A little surprised, Nina nodded. He contacted me this morning. He said he wanted to apologize in person. Malcolm was silent for a moment. Then he said softly, "Give him a call this afternoon. I want to hear what he has to say this time." As soon as the door closed, Malcolm turned to the window and looked out at the street, the small lines of cars and the sea of light. He knew there were millions of people like him rejected, overlooked watching this story, and they needed to see more than an apology. That afternoon, as the sunlight slanted through the glass, Preston Cole walked into Malcolm's office. He no longer looked bossy. He was still dressed in a sharp suit, but his eyes were different, deeper, more humble. Malcolm stood up and held out his hand. "Hello, Mr. Cole." Preston shook it, held it for a long moment, and then said, "I thought a lot last night. It was awful to realize how small I had become in my pride." Malcolm listened. "I watched the video. Mr. Preston continued, his voice choking. "I saw a man sitting still, while I was the one losing control. I taught my son respect, but he didn't. And worse, I made my son watch the video and ask, 'Dad, why did you yell at him?'" He paused, his eyes red. "I don't know how to answer, but I know I need to do the right thing," Malcolm said softly. "And what is the right thing, in your opinion?" Preston looked at him, his voice firm. "I want to invest in the Sky of Equality Fund, not to atone for my mistakes, but to put yesterday's lessons into action." Malcolm smiled slightly. "I appreciate that, but do it because you believe in it, not because someone is watching." "I do," Preston replied, his eyes shining. "I used to think fairness was a luxury, but now I understand it starts with admitting you're wrong." Malcolm squeezed his shoulder. "Then let us begin again, not as the criticized and the wrongdoer, but as two people learning to respect each other." Preston nodded, his eyes welling up. "Thank you. Reed, you made me feel like a man again." As Preston left, Malcolm stood by the window, watching the late afternoon light fall on the avenue. He remembered Lauren's words, Rachel's lines, Douglas's silence. All of them were pieces of a puzzle in progress. He's not looking to win. He just hopes that everyone will look at this story and ask themselves, "Have I ever been on the other side of the line of fairness?" The phone vibrated. A text message from Lauren Hayes. "I have just applied to be a representative for the Sky of Equality program. I want to tell my story so that other flight attendants do not make the same mistake as me." Malcolm finished reading, smiling slightly. Outside, the late afternoon light spread across the city, as if to confirm that sometimes dawn only comes after the longest and coldest nights. A week has passed since that fateful night at the Denver airport. Malcolm Reed. His story is no longer just a news story. It's become a movement on social media. The hashtag #BoschJustice in Seat 2A continues to trend. People are sharing Malcolm's story, but at the same time, thousands are coming forward to share their own experiences, times when they have been doubted or put down, simply because of their skin color, gender, or the way they dress. The atmosphere in the Nova Flight Systems office today was unusually lively. Employees gathered around the big screen in the conference room, where the program Morning America was being broadcast. The special guest was none other than Malcolm. He appeared on television, wearing a light gray suit, calm demeanor, deep and clear voice. The host asked, "Mr. Reed, you have made the whole country talk about justice and dignity. But what made you choose silence instead of reacting violently?" Malcolm smiled, his eyes looking straight into the lens. "Because I believe that sometimes Silence at the right time is more powerful than 1,000 excuses. It forces others to listen with their hearts instead of their ears. The whole studio was silent for a few seconds. The host continued. "Do you think you have forgiven them?" Malcolm replied. "Forgiveness is not erasing. Forgiveness is letting yourself be imprisoned by anger. But more importantly, not letting it happen to others." The saying immediately went viral. Thousands of comments online praised a man who speaks with truth, not anger. After the interview, Malcolm returned to his office. Nina Carter was waiting at the door, beaming. "You just silenced the entire country for 30 seconds. No politician can do that." Malcolm laughed. "I just say what I believe." She placed a document on the table. "This is the first report from the Sky of Equality project. Summit Air has started the multicultural awareness training phase in 3 cities. And there is more good news. 6 other airlines want to join." Malcolm raised his head slightly, his voice slow. "So, the domino effect has begun." Nina nodded. "It's not just in the airline industry. They're asking if we can apply this model to finance, education, even healthcare." Malcolm looked out the window, where sunlight shone on the building across the street. "That's what I hope for, when equality is no longer a privilege, but the norm." That afternoon, Lauren Hayes arrived at Nova Flight headquarters. She wore a simple white shirt, her hair tied back. She looked the same woman, but her eyes were different. They no longer contained the fear of obedience, but the determination of change. When she walked in, the staff recognized her, the flight attendant from the video that had been criticized. But instead of looking at her with judgment, they greeted her with smiles. Malcolm stood up to greet her, his voice soft. "Lauren." "Welcome." She smiled softly, her hands shaking slightly. "I don't know if I deserve to be here." He replied, "You're not just worthy, you're needed." Lauren sat down and told Malcolm about the first training session she had just conducted for Summit Air employees. "I started by telling my own story, not to justify it, but to show them that anyone can be wrong, if they don't stop to listen." Malcolm listened attentively. "You did what many people don't dare to do, turn a mistake into a learning opportunity," he said. Lauren looked at him, her eyes welling up. "I just think, if I hadn't realized that day, I would have lived with that shame forever." "Thank you for not treating me like an enemy," he replied softly, "because I know the real enemy is indifference." At that moment, Lauren laughed, though tears still fell. "I get it. Fairness is not just how we treat others, but also how we treat ourselves." Meanwhile, in a small coffee shop not far from the headquarters, Rachel Alvarez was putting the finishing touches on a new article. She titled it Seat 2A, the story that made America stop and listen. The article begins with an excerpt from a conversation between Malcolm and Lauren, then expands on the story's significance in society. There are moments that make a nation look back. A man was humiliated on a flight, but instead of getting angry, he chose to stay silent, and that silence forced millions to speak up. She typed the last line, paused for a moment, then added a concluding sentence. "If fairness can start from seat 2A, then perhaps there is still hope for all of us." Rachel hit submit. She knew the post would be shared everywhere, but more importantly, it would make people think. That evening, Malcolm received a call from Douglas Hamilton. "Mr. Reed," Douglas said, "today we completed the appointment of Lauren Hayes as the official representative of Sky of Equality. Thank you for not turning your back on us. Malcolm replied. I didn't do it for Summit. I did it for the people at Summit, the changemakers. Douglas was silent for a moment, then said, If you had not been on that flight, I would never have understood that justice is not a policy, but a responsibility. Malcolm smiled. Then perhaps the worst thing becomes the greatest gift. After hanging up, he sat by the window. The city lights streamed in, twinkling like stars. He remembered each face: Lauren, Preston, Rachel, Douglas, each a part of this journey. And in that moment of peace, he realized sometimes to change the world, it doesn't take a victory. It just takes one person to stand still in the right place, with determination and belief in what is right. 2 months later, Washington, D.C. was ablaze with early spring. Cherry blossoms were blooming, painting Constitution Avenue pink. The atmosphere in the city was unusual warm, vibrant, and hopeful. Inside the National Convention Center, hundreds of business leaders, journalists, academics, and airline employees gathered for the National Conference on Equality in Business. The event was co-organized by Summit Air and Nova Flight Systems. On the big stage, the words "Sky of Equality, when dignity takes flight" stood out under the lights. Backstage, Malcolm Reed stood silently before the mirror. He said nothing, just adjusted his tie and looked deeply into himself. The reflection in the mirror was no longer the man who had been humiliated on Flight 2A that day. Now there was a man with the peaceful look in his eyes of someone who had understood the power of justice. Nina Carter walked over, tablet in hand. Everything's ready. You'll be speaking at the end of the program. After Lauren. Malcolm nodded. Thank you. Nina, I just hope no one came today for the scandal, but for the future. Nina smiled. You've got them interested. Now you'll get them to believe. In the auditorium. Lauren Hayes took the stage first. She wore a simple blue uniform, the symbol of aviation, but her voice was strong and full of emotion. I used to be a rule keeper, but I didn't understand for whom or for what. I thought it was my duty to maintain order, until I realized the order I maintained was destroying the dignity of others. Today, I stand here not to justify, but to say change is possible, if we have the courage to look straight at mistakes. In the auditorium, hundreds of people were silent. Many eyes looked up at her, some with tears and some with smiles. Lauren ended with a sentence that made the whole hall applaud. If a person can be degraded just because of their appearance, then who among us is truly safe from prejudice? And if one person dares to say enough, then maybe the world can be a better place too. After applause, the host introduced, please welcome Mr. Malcolm Reed, CEO of Nova Flight Systems. Malcolm stepped into the light. He had no speech, just a small folded piece of paper in his hand. He smiled at the room. Lauren, Preston, Douglas, Rachel, and hundreds of people listening. Thank you, everyone, he began. 2 months ago, I was just a passenger. I had no intention of changing anything. I just wanted to go home. But then, an incident forced me to remember that justice does not exist by default. It must be upheld every day, by each person. He paused for a moment. The light fell on his face, giving it a strange calm. I have received a lot of compliments and sympathy. But please understand, I am not a hero. The real heroes are those who dare to change, like Lauren, like Preston, like the hundreds of Summit Air employees who are learning to see the world with new eyes. He glanced at Douglas Hamilton, who was sitting in the front row, and nodded slightly. Fairness is not something that can be granted. It is something that must be recognized as a fundamental right. No one needs permission to be respected. Applause broke out, but Malcolm raised his hand for silence. But today, I want to talk about something else, about silence, because sometimes silence is complicity, but sometimes silence is the way to let power be heard more clearly. He looked down at the small piece of paper in his hand. It was a few notes he had written the night before, sitting by the window looking out at the Washington skyline. He read slowly, his voice deep and resonant. We live in a world where too many people are taught to keep their heads down to survive. But no future is built on fear. All real change begins when someone, despite being looked down upon, chooses to stand below. Rachel quietly recorded the video. She knew every word he said today would be shared everywhere, not for the drama, but for the truth. Malcolm continued, "My story is no longer mine. It belongs to everyone who has ever been misjudged, who has ever been told they weren't good enough, weren't right enough. And if anyone listening to this today feels small, remember they can make you look down on them, but no one can take away your worth." The whole hall stood up. The applause was prolonged, mixed with sobs and small cheers. Douglas walked up to the stage and shook Malcolm's hand. He said softly, so only Malcolm could hear, "Thank you for making me see what 22 years of leadership never taught me. Dignity has no class." Malcolm replied, his voice soft but firm, "The important thing is not who is wrong, but who dares to correct it." Below, Lauren wiped away tears. Preston bowed his head solemnly. Rachel made a note of the last line in her upcoming article. Today, not just an airline, but a generation has learned to look back. Oh, that evening, after the conference ended, Malcolm left the building and walked out onto the quiet street. It was dark, but the Washington sky was ablaze with lights. Oh, he looked up and watched the planes streak across the sky, tiny dots of light streaking across the vast expanse. Lauren walked up to him, smiling softly. "Do you think we've really changed anything?" Malcolm looked up at the sky and replied slowly, "Not enough, but I believe we're starting in the right place." Lauren nodded. The two of them stood still, staring at the open sky. The gentle breeze carried the scent of spring and hope. Malcolm's phone vibrated. A text from Nina Carter Summit Air just announced all employees will receive mandatory equality awareness training, and they want you to be the opening speaker. He smiled and replied, "No need for me. Let Lauren stand there. She is living proof of change." He put the phone away and took a deep breath. He felt not triumph, but the peace of knowing he had done the right thing. The story of Flight 2A ends here, but its impact does not. Somewhere, on another flight, another passenger will be looked upon with more respect. And who knows, that might just make the world a better place. Malcolm turned to Lauren, his voice low and warm. "You know, I still remember what it felt like to be asked to leave my seat that day. Now I understand sometimes, to sit properly, you have to stand up first." Lauren laughed, tears falling silently. And there were people who stood up, not to leave, but so that we could all sit back more equally. Malcolm nodded slightly, the light reflected in his eyes, burning like a small but steady flame. He said, as if to conclude it all, dignity cannot be taken away. It can only be forgotten. And when one person remembers, the world remembers with them. The spring breeze blew gently. In the sky, an airplane took off, cutting through the clouds. The story of Malcolm Reed reminds us that dignity isn't something the world gives us. It's something we carry within, no matter who doubts it. When he was humiliated, he didn't fight with rage. He stood with grace. That choice to remain calm, to act with clarity, became his greatest power. In life, we all face moments when we are underestimated or treated unfairly. But true strength lies not in shouting louder, but in standing taller. Justice doesn't always roar sometimes. It whispers through patience, wisdom, and conviction. For those who have lived long enough to know pain and prejudice, Malcolm's story is a mirror. It tells us that quiet courage can move mountains, that even one act of calm defiance can awaken change in others. So, hold your ground when life tries to push you out of your rightful seat. Not for revenge, but for respect, for yourself and for those who come after you. Thank you for watching and sharing this journey with us. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us keep telling stories that inspire hope, courage, and compassion. Stay kind, stay strong, and never forget dignity is not negotiable.